So now this is where it gets interesting. Let's build together our first node type. So that actually includes coding. And let's go into the website right now. Here at the top we have our claim. And below that I would love to have some text which says, join our next meetup on October 31. And then below that, let's add RSVP. Now, this one here should be a headline, and this one here should be a paragraph. And now we could, of course, just link this by just using here a link. But then you can see it would look like a normal link. And I want to have it a big call to action. So let's build our first content element, and we call it a button. So what we're doing here, let's start by going to vienna.js.site configuration. And here we have existing content element called text. And let's just reuse that by calling it button and saving it as a separate file. And here also we replace text by button. It's important for you to know there is a mix between conventions and something which Neos requires you to do. Right now we're just doing this best practice setup, and so just follow it along, and later you'll learn more distinctions. So here we create a content element called button, and every time you see something saying UI, this refers to the backend UI, so how editors are able to enter the content, and we want to call this a button. So this is the label which comes if I open this. Right now we keep it in a single language, so we just write the name here. And then we have an icon. This icon comes from Font Awesome. So Font Awesome doesn't have a button icon here, but it has a link icon. So that's pretty similar. So let's use this one. So the name here is link, and therefore we can say icon minus and just use the name, in this case link. Neos orders these elements here in that view according to this position here. And you can see we start with 200 for the text. And after that, the image has 300. So let's put it right after the image and call it 400. It's really helpful to start with big numbers, because then later, if you want to get something between, you can say 350 or 360 and you have loads of space. It should be inline editable, that's perfect. And instead of just having a text, let's call it a label. In the UI, we want to use the inline editing, so it's a lower, which changes to CK, but it still stays that name for now. And as a placeholder, I don't want to have a full paragraph like we had for text, but we just want to have a label, so just text. So let's say enter label here. And now you see under options, there's something called silhouette. So normally for the Aloha configuration, I'm able to define something like 20 lines where I'm exactly saying what kind of formatting I'm allowing, like link, list, tables, headlines, all of that. And it's cumbersome to just repeat it all the time. So we are using a package called Zeitgeist Silhouettes, and it allows us to just use predefined silhouettes and also define our own silhouettes, which we are doing later. So if you go into packages application, you'll find there's a package called Zeitgeist Silhouettes, and all the code you find in there, you can take as reference, because they just use the same technologies we're using, right? So there are predefined silhouettes, and you see there's text plain, text block, and text free. So text free is the one which we're using right now for text, which basically allows all the styling features. And if we go up, we can see there's one called text plain, and this one is still of type string with no content by default, but it doesn't paragraph by default, and it doesn't allow table, links, lists, or any formatting. So this is exactly what we wanted to use. So let's change that to text plain. And beside the label, we also need to have a link. That link should be of type string, and What else do we need for that? In the backend, so the UI should have a label called link target. And now there's a distinction which is very important for you to notice. Everything you enter inline here, you would normally just define a placeholder text and you can enter it here. On the right side here, there's a big panel which is called inspector. And in that inspector, you have groups like change type or visibility. And in that group, you have individual configurations. And we want to start our own group now here. Therefore, in the UI here, we call this, we added inspectors. And here you can see groups, link. So this is, I call my new group link. I give it a label of link. And I can again define an icon, and I'm just using the same as above. So I'm calling it icon link. And now this link should be shown in the inspector group, which we just created, which is also called link. And now if we load the page, you'll see the button appears, but there will be an error. So don't be afraid. Okay, so here we got our new element. It's called button. It has the link icon, and I can add it to the page. And here I get a big error. Why? Because it tried to render, but it couldn't. That's totally fine. There's another thing here. It was supposed to show up. So let's check if we have some typos here. This one is singular. It's the inspector. Okay, and now when I click on it, you can see I created a group called link, and here we have a link target. So I can already add a link target here, but the whole rendering is missing. So let's go ahead and build up some rendering. If you go in the folder resources, private fusion, you'll notice there's a folder called content, and here we have a folder called text image headline. So let's again start with this text thing and just build our own button element by creating a new folder called button. And here we want to have a file called button. And here I'm defining a prototype, which is called content.button. So you'll see we're just repeating the same name over and over. There's a reason for that. And it inherits from content component. So content component is the basic type which renders these elements, which work both in the backend and in the front end. So you see here we have property, which we define here, and then we have the rendering. And here we're accessing props.text. So the concept here comes from React. We define here props, so things that we want to use. And then here, in that rendering, we can use those props. So this one shouldn't change values, it just should use the props which are defined here. So let's define a prop called label. It should be news editable. And as a property, we want to use, this property name comes from here. So here on the properties, we're using the name label. And if we just add that here, and maybe we want to change the class already here to Indiana.js site button. Voila, it asks us here to enter a label. We have the target on the right side, and we can write here RSVP now. And we can even add the link to the sign up page here. So let's remove that from the text. But it doesn't look like a button. And also, if I click on it, I'm able to change text, but it's not a link. So let's fix that. The next thing we want to do is we go back into the code, and here, instead of having a div, I want to have it a link target, and I would like to say props.link. So how do you get the link? let's create a new prop here called link. And here we're using a special character which says everything inside here is eel. So here I can use a helper method which is called queue, and it's very similar to how jQuery does chaining. So I'm saying here queue node, and let me just straight ahead show you from read the docs where you find all the references. So on the references here, you can find there's eel, and you find there's many methods which you can use inside those brackets. And beside that, we have something called flow query, and you see it has a lot of functions and they look pretty similar to jQuery. Okay, so we're using this one here to access the property, and here the property is called link. So we add the string link, and of course this one should also be called link. So this node here is the button, and from that button we are accessing the property link, and we're assigning it as a props called link, and that can be used here. So now we're rendering the link, and now if I reload, that will be a link, and that's cool. The only problem now is that I'm not able, you see, if I go over it, it's a link. The problem now is that I'm not able to change the text anymore, because every time I would click, it opens the link. So that's not what we want to have. So let's create something new, which we call render as link. And here, I would love to figure out if you're in the backend or not, and render it like this. So you always have available element called node, and you also always have available element called site, which refers to the current page we're on. So site.context in backend is a flag which always exists, and it defines the content if you're in the backend rendering or not. And if you're in the backend, we don't want to render it as a link, and if you're in the front end, we do want to render it as a link. And so what I could do here, there's add if render, and now we say props.render as link. So we would only render this if it's props.link. Please notice this one here is just a name I chose. We could also say something. That's just an arbitrary name. The if is the important part. If makes sure that this is rendered only if that value here is true. And this is just something we can use to make it nicely readable. So what will happen now is that we're rendering this if we are in the front end, and in the back end we'll not have anything. So that's not really perfect. So let's just copy that, and we'll later refactor that to a better looking code. That if it's not rendered as link, we want to render a div. The div doesn't need to have a link target, but it keeps the same button and it shows the same label. And now let's start the page again. All right, and if we open that in the front end, the page will load, and here you see it's a link and it points to our external link. Okay, that's cool. So we could improve that by actually opening it in a new tab. So we could add here as a target blank. And what we can also do is we actually want to make it look like a button. So let's take this class here, and if you go into resources public frontend, you'll find there's a very simple CSS file. We'll replace all this front end a bit later, but for now let's keep it like this and just add another class. And as a color, I want to have it white, and the background should be red. And so now if you reload it in the front end, in the back end, we have a button. It doesn't look really good. So what we could also do is display inline block, and we might want to add some padding, let's say 5 pixels and 8 pixels, and text decoration we want to have none. And now it looks like a button. So what we can also do here is let's add some active states. And of course, that's easy to write in Sass, which we'll do later. So we want to have the background. Let's keep it really simple for now. Let's just make it blue. So we have our button. On hover, it changes the color. And in the backend, we also have our button here. And in the backend, we can edit the content, and you see it actually grows really nicely. I'm gonna edit content. And this is our first node type. Really nice. So let's add one more thing. It would be really helpful that we could define if that target here should be external or not. So right now in the rendering, we defined here that the target is blank, but maybe we also want to do it for internal links. And for internal links, opening a new tab is not cool. So let's define another property here, which we call link target. And here as a type, we want to have a Boolean. So again, I want to show you how it looks in the documentation so you get used to that. Under references, you find the property editor reference. And here you find all the types, and for those, all the options you have. So we have here a type Boolean, which is great. And you can see it will be editable on the right side in the inspector. So let's edit here. So here we want to define a UI, and here we want to have a label, and let's call this a target. So let's say open in new window. Just to make it more obvious, we can make this a string explicitly. And as inspector, we want to add it to the group link, which we defined here above. Okay, and now in the button, so it's always nice if you wrote something like that in the beginning, just reload it here and see if it actually works as expected. So here now we have a checkbox, open in new window, and we can say open now in new window maybe. So we want to check this, and then we want to create a copy, which I just paste below. Same window, and you can see Neos doesn't force you to have any layouting. So right now, because we did inline block, it actually puts them side to side. That doesn't look so good here. So we could here add a margin so they have a bit spacing. And here I want to open the same window. Let's publish it. And now here, after we change the code, it should work correctly. So we have the button fusion, and here we want to get again another property, which we called link target. And it's just easy to take the same names for the props and for the property. So you can just reuse that. And then here the property target should be either blank or self. So if that link target is the Boolean is true, then we want to open it in a new window and we use blank. And otherwise we want to use self. So now instead of this fixed string, we could just use props.linkTarget. And if you now open the site, we'll see here this opens in a new window, and this also opens in a new window. So of course the error here is that it needs to be underscore self. So let's try it again. And this one now opens in the same window. And this one here opens in a new window. Great. Okay, so there are now a few ways to improve this. Of course, why does the editor need to always enter a new window? Because normally it's obvious that it should open in a new window if it's an external link, or for internal links we want to open in the same window. So you'll see in Composer here we are requiring a package called carbon link. And I want to get you familiar with all the code, so we're diving right now directly into the carbon link code. You see packages, and here it's on the carbon, and then there's a carbon link. And let's just go in the, let's just see, there's resources, private, fusion. You notice that's the same structure. And here on the link, we have a link. So it's carbon link.link, $point link. And it offers all these configurations here. And then here it does something which we don't have to understand at that moment. So this is the public API, basically. So what we want to do is, instead of just using normal HTML elements, we can also use any Fusion object which is defined before. So what we can do here now is we just say, I want to use from the carbon link package the link Fusion object, and now as a link I want to give it props link, and we're getting rid of the target here, and we're getting rid of the target here because that should be figured out automatically. And we have render as link, and we have class. And so let's see here, we have additional class, and these are the CSS classes. So we'll use additional class here. And if I just do it like this and get rid of that as well, oops, we now have carbon link. It gets as a link our link property. As an additional class, it gets Vienna.js site button, and we want to close that as well. And in between, it has the label. Cool. So you'll see now in the backend, it looks exactly the same, and we can still edit the content. We still have the link here. And in the front end, now if I click it, it opens in a new window, and both open in a new window, because that's actually what makes sense for external links. Okay, so what do we want to do again? It would be really nice if we could enter here not only just as a text link, but if we actually could do something like meetups and then reference to that meetups page. So that's also really simple to do. We just need to better define our editor here. So we have under properties links, we have a type string, and it should stay type string. But in the inspector, we can say use a different editor. And what we want to use here is neos. And of course, you don't have to remember that. I'll show it where you can find it, but you'll see it's always the same. So here we want to use the link editor as an editor. And you also find that here in the property configurations, and you'll see there's a link editor. So the only thing you have to do here is define that it's a link editor. And now if we reload the page, the first thing you notice if you click on it, it kept the same value. This is something which works really nicely in Neos that you normally don't lose later easily. And here, let's remove it and instead select meetups and publish it. Of course, apply first, publish it. And now if we load the page, you'll notice this one here opens in a new tab, and this one here just switches to the meetup page. So you noticed for defining this link group, there was actually quite a lot of code, and it really is not so important that it repeats to say link and link here. So there's a trick to save a bit of time. We have something called a mix-in. So NodeTypes can inherit from multiple elements here. So right now, it is a super type of news content, and you can add additional ones here. And what we can add here is, this is something we just defined, so you could build up your own mix-ins. We have one mix-in which is called mix-in inspector general, and what it does, it is abstract true. So abstract means it cannot be created in the dialogues. And as a inspector group, it defines one which is called general, and it's translated from the translation files. So now if we use that mix-in here, let's say true, and we get rid of our link here, link group here, and of course here we have to adopt by saying group general. We saved a few lines of code, and it's very easy to always remember that the group is general, so you can reuse that pattern. And if you open it in the backend, and I click on a link, there's a group called general where the link is defined. Wow, so we have gone through a lot of information right now, but we are now able to build our first node types, and you actually have the basic knowledge to build your own node types, and they can become really complex. So I'll show you more and more examples of what you can build, and you'll get a feeling of it pretty fast. Trust me.